An early band of young guys playing rock and roll that had a hit was the Champs with Tequila. Seals and Crofts of Summer Breeze fame in the early 70s were part of that band. Anyway, there's footage of them doing Tequila. It was such a big hit. Now, the only vocal is when they say Tequila. There's a whole bunch of rock and roll instrumentals where they say one word at the break, and then it's back to an instrumental. Anyway, this is kind of like an early garage, a Paleo Garage kind of thing of, amateur rock and roll. The Champs. Dwayne Eddy. I used to see a lot of him back in the 80s. He did a tour with Ry Cooder and people from the Wrecking Crew, Hal Blaine and Don Randy and, Steve Douglas. God, I miss that guy. Anyway, it was virtually impossible to not be affected by Dwayne Eddy, particularly Rebel Rouser. It was such a right out of the 0 to 60. There was one record before that, but Rebel Rouser was just incredible. I bought it as a kid. I mean, this is not, what?
Cut.
The 50s wasn't so much guitar-based as the 60s was, but when there was a guitar player, the big one in the old days was Dwayne Eddy. He was coming from country music, and he had this twangy guitar sound, kind of a Chet Atkinsy, but more rock and roll. And I used to see a lot of him back in the 80s. He was living in Tahoe. He did this tour with Ry Cooder and the Wrecking Crew, basically. Hal Blaine and Don Randy and Steve Douglas. It was just wonderful beyond belief. And it was just a heart of gold. But, everybody, George Harrison, all these people, you start with Dwayne Eddy back there. This is the early guitar hero back when there weren't that many guitar heroes. And people were concentrating on the singers and the pianists and the record itself, rather than breaking it down of like, here's a guy who's ripping off a guitar. So this is very different with Dwayne Eddy. Now Link Wray, I used to see him a lot. He did a record with Commander Cody and Jerry Garcia and stuff. And he was around the Bay Area for quite a while. But in the old days, when he did Rumble and Rawhide and those records, Rumble was banned, and it was an instrumental. Because Rumble was a teenage slang word for a gang fight. We're going to have a rumble tonight. It's like West Side Story, but real. And it was, he was badass. I mean, he was a mean guitar player. And of course, when the punk rockers heard this stuff, they just wigged out completely, and he got himself another generation of people, thanks to the Cramps, and Lex Interior and Poison Ivy, who were record collectors and started a band. But they got that Link Wray was nasty. And here he is, and he's playing a Dan Electro Longhorn guitar, which is worth $1 gazillion these days. Link Wray and his Rayman. This is a basic teenage rock and roll band with a badass guitar player. These guys got switchblades in their pockets. Santo and Johnny are kind of a garage band. There's just a couple of Mexican kids that came up with this tune that launched a career. There's a bunch of albums. Sleepwalk. I never get tired of hearing this. I used to play it on the slide guitar too. It's just a beautiful piece of work, and there's a film clip of it. What luck! And also the flip side of it, all-night diners were checking out too. Again, remember B-sides. I always listen to the B-sides of these old records because they oftentimes didn't know that it was better to save something that might be a hit for another record. Phil Spector was the first guy to put absolutely no possibility of an A-side by having just a crappy instrumental by the Wrecking Crew. So he wouldn't have a double-sided hit. He saw it as losing money. And so it is. But there are still double-sided 45s back in the day. Now, I never saw the Shadows, and I'd heard of them, but it didn't even register. I knew the song Apache from the Jorge Ingemann one that was played on the radio that I heard. A German guitar player, actually, but it's really nice. He scratches the strings, the fat strings, to make the sound of arrows whizzing by. Anyway, this is the Shadows. This is the original Apache. This was a British band that affected the Beatles and all those guys. It was kind of their version of the Ventures. But these guys are badass rock and roll kids playing instrumentals. Couldn't hear the voices, so why bother to sing? It was a style to have an instrumental rock. There was a lot of it. The Pyramids. Now, the Beatles were out by this time, so it's a surf music era, but the Pyramids thought, well, the Beatles have long hair, we'll shave our heads. And they did, and the rest was history for about a minute. But they did get out a good record. Penetration. You know what that means, right? These were all virgin boys in the early 60s not getting anywhere. And deservedly so. But it's a fabulous surf instrumental, an important one. It was a hit of sorts. But these records were more of a hit in California than like in New Jersey or something, you know. There's a lot of records out here and affected the culture. Huge out here, surf music. And here they are on film. What luck. And the Ventures were an inspiration to every kid in the early 60s that wanted to play rock and roll before the Beatles. I was one of those. I had a friend who had an electric guitar and an amplifier with reverb. I mean, that was a revelation to go from acoustic guitar to an electric guitar with reverb, you know, as a junior high kid. Anyway, the Ventures had some records on how to play the bass and how to play the guitar and how to play the rhythm and all this stuff. They also had endless amounts of albums with cover tunes of the hits of the day for the most part. But they actually had some hits of their own. Walk, Don't Run, the old Jimmy Smith jazz guitar instrumental. And there was Walk, Don't Run 64, which was kind of a jazzed up version of Walk, Don't Run that is I really, really love. And there's footage of it. It's amazing that anybody bothered to film these sorts of things and that they survived, you know. Some of it was probably on videotape and survived. Some of it was on film and didn't get thrown away. It never ceases to amaze me, some of the things that did survive that we can enjoy now that we understand what this stuff means. The Ventures were icons, particularly to every kid that picked up an electric guitar. You had to learn how to play Walk, Don't Run. And you know, they were around for years and years and years. They were hugely popular in Japan and Europe and places like that. But they would do these endless stream of albums of instrumental versions of hit songs, you know. I have like this of the Ventures albums, and but they had some certified their own real hits too. Big one being Jimmy Smith's Walk Don't Run. And then also Walk Don't Run, 64. We're going to play both of them. But I got to hang out with the Ventures for a while back in the early 80s when a lot of the people were going, oh, this is really cheesy music, let's look backwards. And all the old bands were still capable, young enough to be able to tour, and the Ventures did. And I was lucky to be able to talk with them about their influences and what their perception of their role in basically rock and rollers that had more touring success outside the United States after a while. But they're early on, they're northwest Seattle, which is garage country, so it's early garage too. And here they are. It's amazing that there's films of these two great Ventures performances. One of the true greats of rock and roll is Dick Dale. How he would not be in some kind of museum, rock and roll halls of fame and things like that, I can't imagine. He invented surf music. He did the first Eastern scale in Missouri to be in rock and roll. And he helped co-develop I think it was the Fender Showman with Leo Fender, and it was just rock and roll on a stick. He still plays his ass off. And he's on our advisory board. Wonderful stuff. Surf music. This is the guy who invented surf music. He actually surfed. And really, really important things. And he had an underground following playing at the same place every weekend, drawing the same crowd. It was like the Grateful Dead. And all the surfers would come to dance to him at night. And anyway, Dick Dale, a monster figure in the history of rock and roll, and nobody's more important than the invention of surf music. It was double picking that he was doing in Missouri, and that's because he's Armenian. It's bouzouki. Bouzouki is double picked like that. So that's what that was in Missouri. But fortunately, there's a film clip of him doing Missouri. What could be better? You know, it's really a beautiful piece of work.